The following episode was originally recorded for a private podcast as part of the Equipped for Life course. It has been edited for public release, but may reference training material from the Equipped for Life course.
So this came up a few podcasts ago, when we were talking about Lost.
Getting back
No,
to
we're
Lost?
not. No, we're not. We talked about how music is really important to you. One of the reasons
Music and like TV shows and movies and stuff, yeah.
one of the reasons you like Lost a lot is because Lost has really amazing music.
Yes.
And music as a value to you is higher than it is for at least for me.
Sure.
I'm also thinking about, kind of like processing that. The way that we think about like just a piece of music is also a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
So when I listen to a song, the thing that I am thinking about the most, like almost every time, is the words.
Right.
And you don't even notice the words much of the time.
Nope.
And so we saw the new Star Wars movie Rogue One together, opening night. And as we were driving home, we were talking a little bit about the music, which like didn't notice the music at all. But you were listening to the music and whatnot. And so what I want to ask you is, what is your experience like when you're watching something, when you're listening to something? Like, how does the music stand out to you? What is the mental process? Can you describe for a person like me, and I would imagine most people listening to this are not so much like you really zero in on music.
Yeah.
What is your experience like?
So Rogue One, I wasn't trying to focus in on the music the whole time. There were certainly times where I noticed it more. So for those of you that don't know, this was the first time there was a Star Wars film not scored by John Williams. It was Michael Giacchino, who came in right at the end. Like, he had 4 weeks to score the whole thing, was just not enough time. And a lot of people are complaining about the music, and they should just give him a break. And I listened to the whole album recently on Spotify. It was like, I still think it really holds up. I think he did fine. Like, I have no problem. But I noticed
high praise from a musically nitpicky person like you.
I think he did a great job. I would have thought it was fine if I had found out he had 6 months on the thing. I'd been like, yeah, it was a great job, So I noticed, of course, every time he brought in one of the original John Williams themes, the Force theme or the Imperial, the Darth Vader theme, he brought in themes every once in a while, and just for a little bit, and then he'd move on to, it was 95% original music. And then there's a part there was a little bit distracting. There's a part when they go to the really, really rainy mine planet.
Sure.
There's just this, I feel like it's just maybe 4 bars where the score sounds a lot like Michael Giacchino in general was trying to write like John Williams does, like a John Williams-like thing. He didn't want to sound super different. So his score in Up is way different than John Williams. John Williams has a very distinct sound. This is why so many people love John Williams and think all other composers suck. It's because John Williams is just very, very different.
But Giacchino won an Oscar for Up.
Yeah, the Up is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And he's the same guy who did Lost, by the way. And did such a great job in Lost. And that's where I started loving this guy. Don't get back to that. So I just think he's a great composer. I think I enjoy Hans Zimmer usually a little bit more, but I think Michael Giacchino.
Do you know our friend Dave worked for him?
Yeah. And I have not yet spent a lot of time asking him about that, but I know that, and that is really cool. And so there's a couple of bars that actually, it didn't sound like Star Wars. It sounded like a part of the Jurassic Park theme, not the main Jurassic Park theme, but I know that soundtrack a lot really well too. And there's a very certain, I could find it for you on Spotify. It sounds very, very much like Jurassic Park. So
what part of Jurassic Park?
I don't. No. It's not a main theme. It's just part of the score, of one of the kind of more intense scenes. Okay. I might go and just find it and drop it in the podcast, so you know what I'm talking about. And if you know the Jurassic Park, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that does kind of sound like Jurassic." So that I kind of noticed. I was like, "Huh, he's really going for channeling John Williams."
John Williams in general, not just Star Wars.
In general, he's going for a John Williams-like experience, which totally makes sense. It's obviously the right call. But our experience, listening to songs, is super different because I'm the weirdo here easily, who it is so hard for me to hear words at all. to hear lyrics. Like I'm the guy that, so like, I don't know if you've ever heard this story. There's a, those call-in radio shows where you're like, I want to dedicate this song to my wife, my girlfriend, or whatever. Like there was a guy who called into a show. This is like, I mean, this is, 10 years ago or whatever when this song was popular, but Hinder, Lips of an Angel. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. Okay, so this was like a really popular rock song for like 6 months.
Okay.
But if you really pay attention to the lyrics, it's about a guy who he's either cheating or he's tempted to cheat, and he keeps on getting called by like the adulteress or whatever, like at the wrong time. He's like, don't call me right now, I'm with my wife, But yes, right. But the chorus is like, you've got lips of an angel, blah blah blah, and this is this guy like, I want to dedicate Lips of an Angel to my wife.
He's just listening to the chorus.
He's just listening to the chorus. He's not paying enough attention. Like that could so easily happen to me because I barely I have to really really focus because what's happening for me is I am hearing every instrument and I'm like really zeroing, okay, what is the drummer doing? What is the guitar player doing? What is the piano doing? And I can usually basically see all the notes sort of scored out for me in front of me. And so
I just hear a big mishmash.
Yeah. And so it's just like, I don't think one's better than the other. You are going to have a much better experience, like appreciating the poetry and art that some lyricists do that is completely lost on me. That is lost on me. Whereas I know there have been experiences where I've had I'll tell you okay, pay attention to this thing like this drummer's doing here, right. And you're like, all right, but and I'm like, it's like, oh, that is amazing though what he just did. That's incredible.
He can move his hands fast, cool.
Right? It's like, no, it's so much more than that. And so you won't appreciate amazing drumming, amazing guitar play like as much as I will because I play all that stuff and I can appreciate. Okay, some of this is really good and some of this is just like fine, is just mediocre. And so we both have very different experiences, and and some things we're going to value really high, and some things we'll value really low. And I basically think we're both unbalanced.
So that actually, I think, partially I asked you this question because I think it's really interesting. And I want to understand better, a dynamic like two people watching the identical thing.
Yeah.
Or listening to the identical thing, having such different experiences. Yeah. And I think also I asked this question because I think it actually transitions pretty well to our main topic.
Really?
Because we're going to talk about confirmation bias.
Right.
When I think about our experiences, I think it's kind of like, but it could be that I'm not understanding you very well. So correct me if I'm wrong. But my guess is that it's like there's some level of analogy to when you're listening to a song. It's like you've turned the lyrics down.
Yeah.
And you've turned up the music, and I've turned up the lyrics, and I've turned down the music.
Yeah.
And that emphasizes we're hearing quote unquote the same thing.
Yeah.
But our internal processes for emphasizing what we're listening to affects our experience, and we come away with different things. And confirmation bias is kind of like that.
Yeah, it's sort of like we're both listening to the same song, and we have so this is it's kind of fun. So there's a Beatles documentary where they've got one of the they've brought in the original stuff and loaded into the mixer, and they can play around and turn things up and turn things down. So it could be there was a documentary on Pink Floyd that did the same thing. It's like, hey, now really listen to this thing, or here's the next thing that we recorded these background, or if you ever listen to Queen, if you ever listen to the isolated tracks that the singer in Queen did, he did the background vocals too, and just the isolated everything that happens in the Bohemian Rhapsody is ridiculous. He nails every single one.
That dude was a singer
not processed.
No one else, man.
Such an artist.
Yeah.
So it's sort of we could listen to a song, especially if it's got lyrics. It's we have a mixer in front of us, and in my case, it's sort of I've turned the singers down. I'm not really even paying attention to good singing usually, although it's easier for me to hear an impressive vocalist and still not really pay attention to the words.
You're hearing
right,
that kind of thing.
It's ooh, that was really cool. I can't believe they can hit that note. Whereas for you, it's sort of that's really emphasized and everything else has been kind of turned down. And in the sense, if you exported those two things, they are no longer the same thing. It's almost like we're not hearing the same thing because instantly this processing thing is happening. And so I'm getting this one experience because I'm basically hearing version A of a song and you're hearing version B of a song, which is super different. Yeah. And of course we have different experiences.
But literally we're hearing the same thing. We're getting the same input.
Right.
We're the ones who are tuning out certain things.
Or our mind is sort of doing it
There's an automatic process.
Yes.
And so similarly, I think that is a lot of what happens in confirmation bias.
Yeah.
If you watch like a liberal late night guy do his thing, he's interviewing so and so, like a given thing is going to stand out to you, and you're going to walk away with one impression, whereas maybe one of your Democrat friends would listen to it and think, oh, like something else stood out to them, based on their biases, their interests, what they're paying attention to, which is what they're thinking about. And so being like against confirmation bias means trying to find your filters.
Like, how interesting is it that two different people can read the exact same article? Like, it's very objective. The words are right there in print on the thing, and they have such a wildly different experience of it. And we've experienced that with stuff that we've written and we've published on our blog, where some people be like, this is amazing, this is wonderful, how charitable. And then the pro-choice person comes in and is like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever read. Like, or I can't believe that, like, you were so mean to that person. It's just like, how are both these commenters reading the same thing? They're reading it through filters, like really heavy filters, and they're having a different reaction to it.
Yeah. Find the filters.
So given that, we want to talk about confirmation bias today. And I've been thinking about confirmation bias a lot lately, particularly because of something that a friend of mine named Jason Lepijarvi said. We had this kind of Twitter exchange back and forth. And he asked me an interesting question that I sort of answered then on Twitter, but basically I've been thinking about for the last several months. I had retweeted this interesting Washington Post article, and I'll link to this if anyone's interested, but it came out after the election. And it has some data. They've done some polling and basically come to find out something that I'm sure is going to surprise exactly 0 people listening to this podcast, that people who voted for Trump tend to have I don't want to say almost only, a large majority of friends who also voted for Trump, and people who voted for Clinton, the vast majority of their friends also voted for Clinton. There wasn't a whole lot of overlap. And so they looked at the data here, they talked a little bit about it, like, maybe this isn't the best thing, and I retweeted it. I just said, this is a sign that something is very wrong. So this pro-choice person responds. Okay. It says, my friends and I disagree on plenty, but I consider support of abortion rights non-negotiable for being my friend. It was like, okay. And so I just responded. I was like, I'm not going to get in an argument. I've already tried getting in arguments with people on Twitter, and I just basically decided I'm not going to do that anymore. So I just responded, but I made it public. Like, I started with the period, so that kind of everyone could see it. I said, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I think being friends with people who disagree on all subjects helps us avoid confirmation bias. And that was it. I was out. I'm not going to keep on doing things. But Jason Lepijarvi responded to that, and that kind of began my exchange with Jason. So he said, and he asked a really interesting question that I had to spend like some time really reflecting on. He said, excellent advice. In your feeds, like social media feeds, what is the ratio between pro and con on, and he just starts listing some things: abortion, Trump, Castro, euthanasia, marriage, Medicare, taxes, etc. So after thinking about it for a while, I tweeted him a few times, and kind of this is basically what I said. I said, it's a good question. I said, because of how stressful the election year was, I hid a lot of people from my feed. I almost never, I don't know if I even ever unfriended anybody who was being obnoxious about the election, but I certainly hid some people. I did that Facebook thing where you can hide people but not unfriend them. Unfollow or whatever. Yeah. So I said, I hid a lot of people from my feed, not because of their viewpoints, but based on whether or not they were charitable or obnoxious. So I'd say my feeds range from 90-10 on some issues all the way to 60-40 or so on some issues like Trump. I do spend a lot of time talking one-on-one with people who disagree with me about issues, but not so much on social media. So his response was, only lately have I understood why so many opt out of social media discussions on tricky topics. Too much misunderstanding. And he responded specifically to the thing that I said, where I'm hiding people based on not their viewpoints, but whether or not they're obnoxious. He said, this is a good point. Disagreeing virtuously is a difficult art. Virtuous disagreement is more valuable than obnoxious agreement. Yes. So I thought that was interesting. So that's led me to kind of keep thinking about this. I've continued kind of reflecting on myself and what is my situation with like my social media feeds, with my like the list of people I hang out in person. What are the ratios? Am I doing as good of a job of avoiding confirmation bias as I would like to? And so I've got a couple of kind of discussion questions for us, but they kind of, a lot of them orient towards like this idea of like, how hard should we be working at trying to have some kind of a balance? Like, it seems pretty obvious to me that what people naturally do will not be the right will not be the right thing. Like, we need to take some kind of an intentional action of trying to have some kind of a balance, of surrounding ourselves with both people who agree and people who disagree. But when I start trying to get into the details on like more like exactly what that means, I don't know. Like, should it be 50-50? Should it be 90-10? Should it be somewhere in between? Like, how should we do this? So I'm really interested in your thoughts on that. It's been a struggle for me. So here's a couple things of just what's going on for me. So in 2016, I hit a lot of people on Facebook. So my Facebook news feed has become, I see fewer opposing viewpoints now than I used to on Facebook, specifically because of the way Facebook works. And there's a couple things going on. So one is I accept almost no Facebook friend requests now, but I also unfriend people like every week. So this is like kind of like behind the scenes. So a couple of years ago, I decided that I had completely screwed up on my kind of policy of Facebook friends. It used to be I accepted everybody who asked, because there's a lot of people like saw me speak somewhere or whatever and be like, friend request. I guess like it happens all the time, especially when I speak at like college kind of things. And I would just accept everybody. And then I ended up with at some point like 2,500 Facebook friends. And then I started having obnoxious results when I would post things and just kind of people just being obnoxious about it. It's just like, why am I having to deal? I don't even know who you are, like that kind of thing. And so I went with the Michael Hyatt approach. Michael Hyatt is this blogger, and he had the same problem. And he had been able to do a thing. He got Facebook to basically delete all of his friends, and he started over from scratch. I was not able to do that, and so I unfriended something like somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people in like the month or two after that. I kind of told everyone, I'm starting a page. If you want to follow my pro-life stuff, I'm going to post it on the page anyway. You don't need to be my personal Facebook friend to follow that stuff. Yeah. If I don't know you and we're not colleagues, probably I will unfriend you. Please don't be offended. And then I unfriended a ton of people. But I didn't get to everybody because Facebook's dumb, and it doesn't give you like this like alphabetical list of all your friends in one page. It does a different order every single time you refresh. So here's what I've been doing. There's actually a secret to this. I learned from this Twitter guru, who the one time where Facebook will tell you anything about all of your friends in one factor is their birthdays. That part where it's like, here's not only all the birthdays today, but all like the upcoming birthdays. That's everybody. And so that's where I'm still finding a bunch of people that I never unfriended in my first kind of process. And so every week I unfriend a lot of people on their birthday. It just kind of is, happy birthday, and I unfriend. And I hope no one's offended, but it's just like I'm just trying to catch all the people. I've got a pretty strict rule. And so here's this process that's been going on. I'm unfriending somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen people every week. And I'm not accepting very many new friend requests. It's like every once in a while. If I actually meet someone new and they send me a thing, okay, fine. So my Facebook friends trend is still down, and I'm hiding people. And so especially people who are who are obnoxious. And so there's certain people who are more on the left side of the political aisle from me that I still see because they're thoughtful and I pay a lot of attention to their stuff. But like as far as like quantity, like number of leftist posts I see on Facebook, it's gone down. And that's a little bit of a concern for me because I want to make sure that I don't end up in confirmation bias land. And so far, like I haven't known, like it would be kind of nice if like, could I like, I don't know, seek out smart leftist people on Facebook, friend request them and say, here's why I'm friend requesting you. I like the way you think and I want to follow you more and maybe dialogue with you more, or at least be exposed to your views more. Or do I do something else? And that's been kind of a struggle for me, especially given that I'm, I am gaining new friends right now, but it's because we moved to Charlotte and now we found a church. And so I'm trying to build friendships in that community. And it's a really pro-life church. And so like, there's not a whole lot of like leftist pro-choice people there. I did spend some time with a really cool pro-life Democrat who met me and heard I do pro-life. So I was like, I'm a pro-life Democrat. I'm like, let's meet. And we had a great, we're totally going to be friends and talk about all the political issues. Like we've kind of got this, like, he likes to find conservative friends who are thoughtful. I like to find leftist friends who are thoughtful, and we're going to have great conversations. I told him next time we're talking about paid maternity leave, because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And it's like, we've got this whole list of things that we want to go through. Like, that's good, but it's not happening as much on my social media feeds, partly because of how crazy 2016 was.
Yeah. So are you worried that you are engaging in confirmation bias?
It's at least more possible or plausible for me to be doing confirmation bias on Facebook. So sort of so I've been aware of this thing going on my social media feed now for a while. Like this exchange with Jason happened in November. What I'm doing is I'm trying to intentionally spend more time reading interesting, long articles from people that I disagree with. So it's not as much that I'm being exposed to ideas because I have a Facebook friend who thinks really differently and is posting stuff. Like, certainly that does happen. I do have Facebook friends that I've liked enough of their things and commented enough that Facebook's algorithm puts them near the top of my feed, and that's good, and I want that to stay. I could like name people right now. Here are some people that I often see, and I'm really glad they show up on my newsfeed. But because I know that I'm seeing less of that stuff on Facebook, I'm spending more time going online. And when I see like a headline for something that I can tell from the headline, I disagree with this author, like at least right now, reading that article. So like I even had this experience recently where I was looking through this website that kind of aggregates a whole bunch of website articles. And I had this experience where like I saw this really, really kind of strongly worded headline for an article that I knew I disagreed with. And I kind of did that thing like we all do. Like I kind of rolled my eyes and just kept going. And then I stopped and thought, why did I keep going? Like, right. Am I being lazy right now? Is it that I would rather just be looking at funny pictures or, interesting videos versus spending time reading what might end up turning out to be a thoughtful article from someone who disagrees?
Well, let's be honest. We would all much rather like look at funny videos and funny pictures than read a thoughtful article from someone who disagrees about anything. And that's always easier.
I have that experience a lot where sometimes, especially at the end of the day, if it's been a long day, I don't want to read this thing right now. Like I want to just I want to watch some funny videos and go to bed. Like that's like what I want. But I'm spending more time reading long articles from people who think differently about something. But it's like and I'll stop if they're being really, I don't want to say like obnoxious. If it's really obvious the person's not taking the other side seriously, I kind of stop. Because what I'm thinking about is like, hey, I'm going to spend a certain amount of my time exposing my mind to alternative viewpoints. And I want that time to be quality time versus quantity time. Like it would actually harm me, I think, if I decided I'm going to make sure I'm Facebook friends with a whole bunch of Democrats, but like they were obnoxious Democrats that always posted really stupid memes. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not in confirmation bias. I've got all these alternative viewpoints in front of me all the time. Yeah, but they're stupid memes and I'm not taking them seriously. It's only making me respect the other side less.
Right.
Whereas what I'd rather do is like, okay, I'm going to spend some time reading a long, intelligent article from someone who thinks differently but has thought well about something so I can really challenge my views on something. And I feel like that time will be better spent. I am more likely to end up changing my mind about the thing if I've spent, as much time reading the one article as I would have spent, looking at 100 stupid memes about the same subject.
Sure.
I want to find people who have written really interesting things about gun control, about paid maternity leave, about foreign policy, like all these different things. I want to, what are these interesting, thoughtful people saying? Because I've now had a lot of past experience of when I finally engage with those ideas, my mind changes about some things. Maybe not all the way from one side to the other. Sometimes I end up more like, maybe in the middle on something. But like that ends up being a good experience for me versus I don't change my mind because some friend posts a snarky comment calling me an idiot because I posted a link to an article. That happens to me too. And it never ends up causing me to be more likely to, if anything, it causes me to be more closed to that entire viewpoint, because now I've had this experience of being called an idiot just for expressing something on Facebook.
Yeah.
So I've just said a lot of things.
Yeah.
Kind of trying to express what's been going on biographically for me lately. I'm interested in any reaction you have to any of that, or at least your thoughts on the question, like, how hard should we be working to balance out our social media feeds, maybe the time that we spend reading things, or the time we're engaging people face to face. Like, how hard should we be working, and what is, maybe roughly a good balance on this?
That's a very heavy question and a heavy topic, and clearly this has been on your mind a lot recently. This has actually been on my mind a lot in the last couple weeks in particular as well. Like you're hitting me right where I live, although maybe in a slightly different way than kind of what you've been experiencing.
That's really interesting.
It seems like it's like an unavoidable conclusion that by doing things like hiding people, unfollowing people, or unfriending people who bother you, that it makes your environment closer to an echo chamber.
Right.
And so that seems confirmation biasy. Mm-hmm. I think that might just be okay. So bear with me. So I think confirmation bias is a major problem, and I think you can kill yourself trying to rid yourself of it.
We didn't say that in the course.
We didn't say it in the course because I think for most people, the problem is they've got confirmation bias. Right. I referenced that teacher, like Taylor Molly or something like that.
Yeah.
That slam poetry thing that he did.
Yeah.
In one of my blog posts. I can't remember which one.
We'll link to it.
He is this amazing thing about the power of teaching. And he has this line that has just really, really stuck with me. He says, I can make a C+ feel like a Congressional Medal of Honor, and I can make an A- feel like a slap across the face. How dare you give me anything but your very best? It's so amazing. And like, that's like so much of that is wisdom. Like, people need different things.
Right.
And so I think probably most people need a slap across the face, like you shouldn't be so confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And there is an extreme on the other end. So I'm married now, and a lot of my time goes to that. Yeah. And that means that I have less time that I can wisely spend trying to understand every issue perfectly, every conclusion that I've come to. So there was a time a couple of years ago where after some interaction with a Muslim friend, I got really interested in the topic of Islam, and like fully intended to like really delve into that topic. Yeah. And then not too long after that, my theology went into like a pretty serious adjustment place. Specifically, I started investigating the Orthodox Church really seriously. And it became really, really difficult for me to take Islam seriously while I was also trying to study the Orthodox Church seriously and all of the myriad of theological questions that arise from that. Yeah. And so I pretty much dropped the Islam thing. Now, I think that Islam is false. I've studied it a little bit. I think it's false. Have I studied it to the level of like really being as confident as would be ideal? Or like knowing the answers to all the arguments? I mean, not even close. Right. Not even close. And I've studied enough to think that probably most Christians are overconfident against Islam. Like there's a lot of straw men going on. Yeah. I think that Islam is totally false, don't get me wrong. But there's also a lot of straw men. And so like that's a very, very worthwhile topic. And at a personal level, I couldn't do it. Because what was going on in my own theology was way too important for me in my emotional life and spiritual life at the time. And time is a limited thing. Yeah. And right now, it's like now it's even more limited because I'm married. In a good way. That's not right. As complaining. I'm really, really thrilled. And so like the topic of confirmation bias, you can be too idealistic about it. Certain things can be unhealthy. And so my process I've had a similar process on Facebook that's gotten a smaller circle of people that I actually follow. I unfollow a lot of people. I almost never unfriend someone, like almost never, but I unfollow lots of people. But that's been going on for a long time. That's not as much the election. Basically, that's just at all times. If someone's really obnoxious, I unfollow them because I just don't want it in my face. Yeah. And so I think my spread has wound up pretty moderate overall. Because I've unfollowed all the obnoxious conservatives and all the obnoxious liberals and all the obnoxious moderates. And what I've got left is I've got a few awesome conservatives and a few really interesting liberals and a lot of people who are in the middle. And so I think I kind of wound up in an okay place, but it definitely leans conservative. A lot of my Facebook friends I know through pro-life work. I mean, most of my friends are pro-life. Yeah. And that's like inevitable unless you're pushing really, really hard to find the pro-choice friends. And on my last few occasions of trying to make contact with like pro-choice people that I saw in comments, they've been like not interested. Yeah. So like I've tried recently, and that just hasn't really worked out very well. So, but like a lot of the process for me has come down to, I want my Facebook feed to be a healthy place that doesn't like make me really cranky. And frankly, most people suck on Facebook. Like they just suck. Some of it is what Jason said. It's really hard to disagree well. And some of it is, if I can get on my soapbox for a second, Facebook is an environment that is like, I suspect that it was designed to make people the most vicious, and by that I mean unvirtuous people as possible.
Wow.
Because like if I was Satan and I was trying to think of a thing that would activate everyone's vices, I might have come up with Facebook. Wow. Like Facebook, it orients the mind so well into what is everyone thinking about me. Yeah. Like what kind of profile picture do I have? Oh, I look really cute in this one, or I look really deep in this one, or whatever. Right. You spend so much of your time thinking about what other people think about you, and you construct an image of yourself. And sometimes that image is vastly different from how you are in person. Yeah. I have so many people. They have a completely different personality online. Yeah. I think that's horrendously dangerous. So all this nasty stuff is going on, and people's vices are being activated in different ways. And then they start having political discussion, and it's just the worst thing ever. Right. And I'm not like picking on pro-choice people or liberals or anything. This is just everybody. This is really bad. And it's me. I've really, really had to be careful about how I use Facebook, and I've adjusted the way that I've used Facebook. And I think there's some things that I've done that have worked pretty well. I'll make another comment about that or two. But that's that's the setting. And so for that reason, wonderful, lovely people are not so wonderful and lovely on Facebook. And so I unfollow them. Yeah. And I'll hang out with them in person, but I don't want to see the obnoxious stuff they put online. It's not healthy for me. A lot of where I'm going here is like confirmation bias is, we need to be healthy people. Yeah. And to be healthy requires some kind of moderation here. You could spend your entire life reading every single thing that anyone writes about abortion or about the economy or gay marriage or whatever. Right. And you can make that your big priority. And like, that'll take over your life. And I've done that. So I'm just like being really personal here. It's fine. Our dad was a Calvinist when we were growing up, like really, really strong, grew up in John MacArthur's church, Calvinist. And so I kind of wound up Calvinist kind of by default. And because like that made the most sense based on what I understood. And my mentor in high school, Ray, was a Calvinist too, kind of. So I ended up a Calvinist when I went to college. And then like I got obsessed with this topic, like obsessed. And I spent so much time studying and reading and talking with different people about Calvinism or Arminianism or Molinism, that whole thing. That the end result of that is I have quite a bit of knowledge about that subject. Yeah. And that's okay. And in my case, it really impacted me negatively at a personal level and at a spiritual level. And so like when I talk about a subject like that with people, because I'll have people asking about questions about that, and I'll have that conversation. Sure. But I've got to be like really careful with myself, and I'll also encourage other people. Like, be careful here. Like what I did, I've likened to the dwarves of Moria from Lord of the Rings. They delved too greedily and too deeply.
Can you just flesh it out a little bit for those of us?
And in the mountains of Moria, the dwarves were digging for mithril, and they were so greedy and digging so deep for mithril, they uncovered the Balrog. That was a bad thing. And so I kind of uncovered my own personal demon by delving too deeply and pushing too hard. The kind of demon that affects me to this day. And so, like, how hard you push to understand a given topic, it's just really, really hard for me. It's like you're hitting me right where I live.
Yeah.
I hate confirmation bias. I hate closed-mindedness. And I really want to be rational and believe true things. And sometimes it's really unhealthy to push too hard for those things.
So if we agree on that, like I think from your perspective, given that we want to be healthy, given that here's the way that you use Facebook and the concerns you have about Facebook, like, is the direction you're going, is that for you, you don't disagree with anything we said in the course. We still want to make sure we don't have confirmation bias, but maybe confirmation bias or avoiding confirmation bias for you has less to do with your social media feeds and more to do with other things you do. And so can you like get clear on that? So like for me, I described, I'm being really intentional with spending some time reading articles from interesting or thoughtful people who disagree with me about topic X. Is that similar to what's going on for you, or what does avoiding confirmation bias look like for you?
Sure. So it's some of that. I like clicking on articles that people give. I have a decent number of liberal friends that I haven't unfollowed because they're not obnoxious enough. Although to be fair, I have a different standard of obnoxiousness to unfollow a more leftist person than I do a right-leaning person.
Does the leftist have to be more obnoxious for you to follow? Yeah.
Just because I still don't want to be in an echo chamber. And so I've got a couple of liberals who are just making me crazy, especially right after the election. They're just like the most aggressive, nasty, just everyone who voted for Trump is an evil person kind of stuff. That really bothered me. And I didn't unfollow them. And sometimes I engaged with them because like the standard is higher.
Yeah.
But there is still a line for both sides. So I think that's a good approach to take, is have a higher standard of obnoxiousness. But what I'm aiming for is not balance in my social media feed. What I'm aiming for is health. I'm aiming for having interesting, healthy people in my feed, regardless of where they are. So like Dustin Stevie is one of my friends from school, who you've also gotten to know, is brilliant, and he's like my favorite Facebook friend, or one of them. He happens to be a conservative, really strong conservative, really smart. And he's really good at like taking a given thing. Here's this thing that this leftist article is saying, and breaking down. Here's why it's wrong, or here's a conservative thing, and here's why there's something wrong here. He's balanced, and he's pretty fair, and he's really, really articulate. Yeah. And he posts, like, he links to left-leaning articles and right-leaning articles. So I'll try to like read anything that he posts. Yeah. And so like that helps.
I do the same thing.
You want to find those good Facebook friends. One of my favorite uses of Facebook is provoking questions. So I'll ask people questions. So recently, so I've got a friend, Dimitri, from my church, who is very, very pro-life, and I think fairly left in at least a lot of other ways. I'm not positive all on his politics at this point. Yeah. Pretty sure he's a pro-life Democrat. And I read an article the other day by David French, who's like my favorite conservative person. Love David French.
Kind of become David French fanboys in the last year. Yeah.
So don't agree with him about everything, but I think he's really, really good. And he wrote an article about how much the Democratic Party loves abortion, and how like basically it's hopeless. They're just always going to love abortion and always going to hate religious people because of it. It's like, that's a really aggressive article. And like if you think that that's crazy, like read his analysis, and we can link to it. Yeah. It's an interesting article. And so I took that piece and like, I wonder what Dimitri would think about it. And I click the share and like post it on Dimitri's feed and say, hey, what do you think? And it was interesting. Like as a pro-life, I'm pretty sure Democrat, he made this comment after the election that, man, if the Democratic Party would just be pro-life, they would win every election. Like he's like really, and they're like, what do you think? And so he had a short response. It was like, oh, I could go on for days about this. They're like, let's talk more. We're going to talk more in person. This was just a couple days ago. But like basically he agreed. He totally agreed with the analysis. Like even though French is a conservative. Right. So I like using Facebook in that way. Is like I ask people like directly who I know disagree, like specific questions, so I can hear some responses.
Yeah.
It makes sense in my frame of view, point of view as a conservative, that French's analysis would be right. But like, am I missing something?
Yeah.
And apparently Dimitri thinks that I'm not, and that's really sad because I'd like for the Democratic Party to not be so aggressively pro-abortion.
Yeah.
So like that's something that I do. I've done that on public statuses. I've also done it like through like direct messaging and like posting to people's walls and that kind of thing. Like asking questions, like looking for what is the response that a smart person would give.
Yeah.
Those are some of the main things.
Before we end, I want to. This is related to confirmation bias. I got this kind of interesting question from a guy named Liam. He emailed me and he said, "I recently looked at the piece on your blog regarding how pro-lifers could benefit from watching After Tiller." For those of you that don't know, After Tiller is this documentary. It's certainly coming from a pro-choice perspective, but they spend a lot of time with, like, I think it's 4 late-term abortion practitioners and kind of, highlight kind of their stories and their struggles and what's going on with them, because now there are, once George Tiller was murdered, there are fewer people doing abortions past a certain stage. So you're kind of focusing on those people.
Okay.
So he says, just out of curiosity, and so there's a post on our blog. The piece wasn't written by me. It was written by my friend Deanna, who now goes by Andrew, who wrote a piece basically encouraging pro-life people to watch this documentary, even though you're going to disagree with some of the things in it. Like, here's like several reasons why it would be a good thing for pro-life people to watch this. I'll link to that piece in the show notes. So Liam says, I recently looked at the piece regarding how pro-lifers could benefit from watching After Tiller. Just out of curiosity, are there any other pro-choice films that you recommend to anti-abortion thinkers? I'm specifically thinking of Abortion Stories Women Tell and Trapped, as well as Obvious Child. In addition, are there any pro-choice films you deem to be morally reprehensible and therefore undeserving of pro-life viewership? I thought that was a really interesting question. So I've seen After Tiller. I have never seen any of those other 3 films that he mentioned. One of them is a drama, and 2 of them are documentaries. So I haven't seen them yet. I actually looked this morning to see, like, are these available to stream or rent anywhere? Literally all 3 he mentioned are not available to stream or rent or buy anywhere, according to the website where I search for that stuff. So
for in disclosure, I haven't seen any of them. Like, I haven't even seen like Juno. Like there's so many.
You haven't
like
seen Juno?
No, there's a lot of like pro-life and pro-choice stuff that I
pro-life heresy. That's the big pro-life movie. Yeah, no,
I'm pretty sure there are other like significant pro-life films that I haven't seen either. I can't remember.
Or films that maybe pro-life people at least are excited about or whatever. Yeah. Juno's fine. It's not amazing, but it's fine. So there's a couple of quick thoughts on this. So I haven't seen those other 3 movies, but in general, so like the way that I think about pro-choice films or films that are, have pro-choice messages is, I think generally speaking, it's good for pro-life people to watch this stuff. Just like I think it's generally good for pro-life people to read interesting pro-choice blog posts or articles. Like I even used to read articles sometimes from this really extreme pro-abortion blog that's no longer in existence, but at the time it was. And their thing was they felt like some of kind of pro-choice people were kind of backing down or finding too much common ground with pro-life people. So they're going to push the envelope and make sure that, this is really, really important. It's fine to be pro-abortion, like that kind of thing. And I would read that stuff too sometimes. I wouldn't read like every one of their blog posts, but once again, it's like kind of like really trying not to be in an echo chamber. I'd read these things. But like certainly the more thoughtful pro-choice blog people were more helpful to me. I think it's generally good for pro-life people to expose themselves to these things, to watch films like this. I'm not really concerned about if someone watched a pro-choice documentary on Netflix, I don't have like this kind of boycott, like is there money going to them? It's like 0.0001 cent or something like that. That's like, I'm not worried about that. I think it's generally good. Like the only time I would think it's bad or like it harms the pro-life person is if it caused them to end up believing false things. But that's the way I generally think about, especially documentaries anyway. Actually, I think the same thing with historical movies. So I've got this beef with movies that are based on historical events. I've got this really big, because I really like history. At some point recently, you said you think there's like this hidden history professor in me that like will never get out. But there's part of me that like if I were to do something else, that might be something I'd be interested in doing. So there are very few dramas, like good movies, like think of like the epic movies that are based on a historical thing, that like so few of them are remotely accurate. And like that bothers me, because now it's teaching a bunch of people bad history or false history. And so like I like spend a lot of time seeking out there's a YouTube channel for this now, but there's also been like some articles, there's people on Reddit that specifically like go on here and they'll talk about like, all right, like Braveheart. Braveheart is like the standard bad history movie. Like, I don't know if any movie will ever top Braveheart in being bad in history because, for example, they have the Battle of Stirling Bridge, except in the movie version, there's no bridge. There's no Stirling Bridge at the Battle of Stirling Bridge.
I studied abroad in England for a semester, and we had to write essays on different history topics. And like they gave us a pretty long set of possible history topics, and one of them was William Wallace.
Really?
And there was a special note at the bottom.
Don't watch Braveheart.
It said students should remember that films like Braveheart are not about William Wallace, and they're more about America than they are Great Britain.
That's really funny.
It was really great.
That's really funny and true. So like I think like there are historical movies that look really interesting and entertaining that I haven't watched yet, because I have yet to find an article that explains what is true and what is not true, because I really want to learn true history. So anyway.
And you don't want to get like the false ideas
I don't want to get the false
head.
ideas stuck in my head. Like I really care about that. But what's really interesting when you can do both. We can watch the movie and get the good stuff out of it, but then be like, all right, well, here's what what actually happens is usually a lot more boring. And that's okay, fine. So same thing with documentaries. So like Loose Change is a pretty famous documentary that came out about 4 years after 9/11, and there's been 4 versions of it. But it's like the thing that sparked the truther movement. The idea that the World Trade Center was bombed. Like the reason that it collapsed was not for the planes, although they do kind of finally admit that planes did run into it. But it's mainly the bombing. No plane went into the Pentagon. There was a missile. And the plane that supposedly crashed in Pennsylvania didn't crash in Pennsylvania. It landed in Ohio, and all those people were disappeared. Like that's a lot of what's going on in Loose Change. So I watched it because I found out that an acquaintance of mine was really into it and was kind of asking about it. It was like, well, I should watch this now. And I watched it. It's pretty compellingly done. Especially like the second version. But
propaganda
then you go into like,
is.
yes, right. Or effective propaganda at least.
Right.
And, but then, I found some websites where like, they kind of went like literally they cover the entire thing. Like, hey, here, like this 15 seconds and then some kind of commentary. Like here's kind of what's not being said.
Right.
In fact, as I was researching it this morning, as I was kind of refreshing myself on the movie, I just found this amazing line on a website that I don't usually spend very much time on called Rational Wiki, but this line is amazing. He said, Loose Change wins the Occam's Duct Tape Award for widely circumventing the simplest, most logical explanation in order to put forth some truly insane ideas. I love the idea of an Occam's Duct Tape Award. I think I'm supposed to be using that. Okay, so anyway, so I watched this thing. So like, for people who watch that document, assuming that Loose Change is wrong, all right, just assume for sake of argument because I'm not going further to that. Just assuming that's the case, then I think people are harmed if they only watch that and come to believe some of the things in it, assuming those are false, and not like they should go and read what the other side has to say or whatever. And fine if it ends up being that you think that there are some interesting questions raised and there should have been a better investigation, like whatever, like have those views, but have kind of properly informed views. So if someone kind of was really, really gullible and watched a pro-choice documentary that said all these false things, we're just going to assume for the sake of the conversation that they're actually false. Sure. And came to believe those things because he didn't end up questioning those things or researching or coming up with like how they come up with those weird statistics, whatever, then harm's done. And I'm just not that worried that actually happens with pro-lifers, because I think pro-lifers, if anything, like you said, like if anything, we're too much in an echo chamber. And if a pro-lifer is watching After Tiller, sure, they're like, before the credits, like in the very beginning, before it starts, they're like, there's an emotional separation from this thing. There's kind of a skepticism and what are these pro-choice directors putting forth in this? What is this propaganda I'm about to watch? But I'm going to like sit through it anyway. Like I'm just not that worried about it. I would only be worried if someone watched the thing and then was like really negatively affected by it. So that's my take on that.
I think I wouldn't give a pro-choice movie like that to anyone that I thought was particularly like impressionable.
Yeah.
You wouldn't give Loose Change to a super conspiracy theory oriented person who's like this sponge that just kind of like took in whatever they heard.
Right.
Because those are the kinds of people that will be hurt the most by propaganda.
Right.
But a like a fair-minded pro-life person who wants to understand how pro-choice people think, how they actually think, not like pro-life, caricature of what they think, and want to understand like how pro-choice people argue for what they do. Like if you want to know how to argue the pro-life position, you should also know how do pro-choice people try to defend it. Like those kinds of things are helpful to know, and you'll understand the whole issue a lot better. But that's if you're like not a super impressionable person who's just terrible at discerning between things. Like there are a lot of people that I know that there's no way I would give them anything like that.
Right.
But that's because they're like not very discerning.
This approach that I'm describing, where like it's like with loose change, like I spent all this time kind of reading like what are kind of alternative views on that. Like I tend to do that with documentaries in general, and I tend to do that with documentaries that I agree with. So like The Cove and Blackfish are two documentaries where I agree with some of the things said in those documentaries that are more kind of in the animal rights oriented issue. So I don't agree with everything on it, but there are certainly some things I agree, and I'm certainly like, I have a different experience watching those movies than I did like watching After Tiller, where there's like this, like, what's going to happen here? Like I'm just gonna, like, I'm enjoying the experience. I've watched The Cove several times just because I think it is so well made even. Mm-hmm. But even in those cases, I still went looking for, okay, what are the counter arguments? What does SeaWorld have to say about Blackfish?
Right.
Because they really don't like Blackfish. Like SeaWorld has been really, really hurt as a company by the Blackfish documentary. And whether that's for good or for bad, like that's up to what people basically think about killer whales and dolphins and SeaWorld having them. But like, given that there's other people that have thought about this and have written about it that also understand about animals, like I want to understand what are the things that are being exaggerated in Blackfish and The Cove, or what are the things where people are just anthropomorphizing killer whales and dolphins in ways that aren't justified based on research. Like I want to understand that, basically just do my best. And right now, do I have correct thinking about those things? I don't know, but at least I've tried. At least I've looked at both and kind of taken both sides seriously and just basically done my best to identify on both sides. That seems like a pretty fallacious argument there, like that kind of thing. And in all those cases, I've seen fallacious stuff in both those documentaries. And I've also seen fallacious stuff in the responses too. And then some interesting stuff from both. And I think this tends to be the experience you're going to have if you're focusing on what the thoughtful people have to say.